Hi, welcome to Mr. Bench's Book Reviews. What's in the box today? We have a book, I expect. Yes, indeed. And it's called Danny, the Champion of the World. Illustrated by Quentin Blake, and it's written by Roald Dahl, who you may have heard of. I mean, you could have heard of anyone. This is pretty long. It's over 200 pages. So we're not going to read it all. We'll see how we get on. Videos normally go to about 20 minutes, give or take. So let's see, it's in chapters. Yes, there's the contents. First chapter seems to be about 7 pages long. There are illustrations. Can almost certainly do the first chapter, and we'll see if we get any further. Danny, the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl. One, the filling station. There's a picture of a baby. That doesn't actually look like a typical Quentin Blake illustration, who's more known for this style. It's more of a photograph. Let's see. The filling station. Not sure what that refers to. We'll find out. Petrol station. When I was 4 months old, my mother died suddenly. Oh dear. It's an unhappy start. And my father was left to look after me all by himself. This is how I looked at the time, and that's the photo. I had no brothers or sisters, so all through my boyhood, from the age of 4 months onward, there were just the two of us, my father and me. We lived in an old gypsy caravan. Probably won't be able to say gypsy these days. There was talk of Roald Dahl's books being having their language made more modern, unless there's something utterly reprehensible. I'll probably just read it as is here. I'm going to make a comment. Behind a filling station. That does seem to be a petrol station if you look at the picture. I think this is a petrol station of some sort. My father owned the filling station and a caravan and a small field behind, but that was about all he owned in the world. It was a very small filling station on a small country road surrounded by fields and woody hills. While I was still a baby, my father washed me and fed me and changed my nappies and did all the millions of other things that a mother normally does for her child. Yeah, in those days, I mean, Roald Dahl's obviously born in 1916, according to the text here at the front. Obviously gender stereotypes, gender roles. But it says normally, it doesn't say mothers should do or anything, so it's actually quite progressive. That is not an easy task for a man, especially when he has to earn his living at the same time by repairing motor car engines and serving customers with petrol. So it's a bit like a mechanic, garage and a petrol station in one. But my father didn't seem to mind. I think that all the love he had felt for my mother when she was alive, he now lavished upon me. That's nice. During my early years, I never had a moment's unhappiness or illness, and here I am on my 5th birthday. There's a picture of him with a spanner or wrench or something, looking happy and oily. I was now a scruffy little boy, as you can see, with grease and oil all over me. I did see that. I saw the oil. But that was because I spent all day in the workshop helping my father with the cars. The filling station itself had only 2 pumps. There was a wooden shed behind the pumps that served as an office. There was nothing in the office except an old table and a cash register to put the money into. It was one of those where you pressed a button and a bell rang, and the jaw shot out with a terrific bang. I used to love that. The square brick building to the right of the office was the workshop. My father built that himself with loving care. So he loves the mother and the child and building the workshop. He's quite a loving fellow. It's nice. And it was the only really solid thing in the place. We are engineers, you and I, he used to say to me. We earn our living by repairing engines. And we can't do good work in a rotten workshop. Well, I quite like that. Engineers work with engines and they do work in the workshop. It's nice and, poetic or whatever. I mean, just using like the etymology of engines, engineers. Common word root. It was a fine workshop, big enough to take 1 car comfortably and leave plenty of room around the sides for working. It It had a telephone so that customers could arrange to bring their cars in for repair. The caravan was our house and our home. Okay. I guess the distinction there, what the home means it was nice to live in, and the house just means it's where they lived, I guess. It was a real old gypsy wagon with big wheels and fine patterns painted all over it in yellow and red and blue. I don't know if that's typical. My father said it was at least 150 years old. There's a picture of this as well. It's like a thing. There's typical wagon wheels that you would expect on a wagon. My father said it was at least 150 years old. Many gypsy children, he said, had been born in it and grown up within its wooden walls. With a horse to pull it, the old caravan must have wandered for thousands of miles along the roads and lanes of England. I think that normally people say traveller now instead of this word gypsy. But now its wanderings were over, and because the wooden spokes in the wheels were beginning to rot, my father had propped it up underneath with bricks. There was only one room in the caravan, and it wasn't much bigger than a fair-sized modern bathroom. Not sure how big that is. It was a narrow room, the shape of the caravan itself. That's not surprising. And against the back wall were two bunk beds, one above the other. Well, that's bunk beds for you. That's pretty. It's just. I mean, how else would bunk beds be positioned? The top one was my father's, the bottom one mine. Although we had electric lights in the workshop, we were not allowed to have them in the caravan. The electricity people said it was unsafe to put wires into something as old and rickety as that. So we got our heat and light in much the same way as the gypsies had done years ago. There was a wood-burning stove with a chimney that went up through the roof, and this kept us warm in winter. There was a paraffin burner on which to boil a kettle or cook a stew, and there was a paraffin lamp hanging from the ceiling. When I needed a bath, I don't know if the wood and paraffin people say that's dangerous. Set fire to things with those. When I needed a bath, my father would heat a kettle of water and pour it into a basin. This will be an old-fashioned use of kettles from an electric kettle then. Then he would strip me naked and scrub me all over standing up. This, I think, got me just as clean as if I washed in a bath. Probably cleaner because I didn't finish up sitting in my own dirty water. For furniture, we had 2 chairs and a small table, and those, apart from a tiny chest of drawers, were all the home comforts we possessed. They were all we needed. So he seems quite content with his life at the moment. Seems to get on well with his dad. The lavatory, old-fashioned word for loo, was a funny little wooden hut standing in the field some way behind the caravan. So, it was fine in summertime, but I can tell you that sitting out there on a snowy day in winter was like sitting in a fridge. I guess sitting in it was cold. About 6 degrees, most fridges. Immediately behind the caravan was an old apple tree. They bore lovely apples that ripened in the middle of September, and you could go on picking them for the next 4 or 5 weeks. Some of the boughs of the tree hung right over the caravan. When the wind blew the apples down in the night, they often landed on our roof. I would hear them going thump, thump, thump above my head as I lay in my bunk. Well, technically above his dad's head, if his dad's in the top bunk. But never mind. But those noises never frightened me because I knew exactly what was making them. They'll bruise the apples, so. I really loved living in that gypsy caravan. I loved it especially in the evenings when I was tucked up in my bunk and my father was telling me stories. The paraffin lamp was turned low and I could see lumps of wood glowing red hot in the old stove, and wonderful it was to be lying there snug and warm in my bunk in that little room. Most wonderful of all was the feeling that when I went to sleep, my father would still be there, very close to me, sitting in his chair by the fire, or lying in the bunk above my own. Yes, there was a very good relationship with his dad. Yeah, we can carry on. Chapter 2, The Big Friendly Giant. Now, you may know there's another book by Roald Dahl called The BFG, about a big friendly giant, but I don't think this is referring to him. But we'll see. My father, without the slightest doubt, was the most marvellous and exciting father any boy ever had. Here is a picture of him. Maybe he's the giant in question. You might think, if you didn't know him well, that he was a stern and serious man. He wasn't. He was actually a wildly funny person. What made him appear so serious was the fact that he never smiled with his mouth. He did it all with his eyes. He had brilliant blue eyes. Brilliant, old-fashioned word for bright. Yeah. I don't think he's just saying his eyes were of excellent quality. I think he's saying they were brilliant blue. They were bright eyes. When he thought of something funny, his eyes would flash, and if you looked carefully, you could actually see a tiny little golden spark dancing in the middle of each eye. But the mouth never moved. I was glad my father was an eye smiler. It meant he never gave me a fake smile, because it's impossible to make your eyes twinkle if you aren't feeling twinkly yourself. A mouth smile is different. You can fake a mouth smile anytime you want, simply by moving your lips. I've also learned that a real mouth smile always has an eye smile to go with it. So watch out, I say, when someone smiles at you with his mouth, but the eyes stay the same. It's sure to be bogus. I've heard that, actually. I don't know if Dahl invented that or if it's just well known. My father was not what you would call an educated man, and I doubt if he had read 20 books in his life, but he was a marvellous storyteller. He used to make up a bedtime story for me every single night, and the best ones were turned into serials and went on for many nights running. One of them, which must have gone on for at least 50 nights, was about an enormous fellow called the Big Friendly Giant, or the BFG for short. So that's another Roald Dahl story. That's nice. People love these kinds of crossovers. The BFG was 3 times... I don't know if this came out before the BFG. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's fun anyway. The BFG in modern English has other names. This refers to something in Counter-Strike, I believe. But I first met it as the Big Friendly Giant. The BFG was 3 times as tall as an ordinary man, and his hands were as big as wheelbarrows. He lived in a vast underground cavern not far from our filling station. I don't know how consistent that is with the description in the actual BFG, but it doesn't really matter. Probably be nice if it was the same. Like, I don't know if there's like a Dahl universe where everything has to be consistent. I don't know if Danny shows up in some other books. I guess this is Danny talking. Did he ever introduce himself? No, he just said when I was 4 months old. So yeah, I don't know. But it's not that important now. Just enjoy it for what it is. Sorry, who lived in a vast underground cavern? The BFG. Lived in a vast underground cavern not far from our filling station, and he only came out into the open when it was dark. Inside the cavern, he had a powder factory where he made more than 100 different kinds of magic powder. I don't know what he made them out of. I mean, I'm not saying he melts horses, but sounds a bit like it. Occasionally, as he told his stories, my father would stride up and down, waving his arms and waggling his fingers, but mostly he would sit close to me on the edge of my bunk and speak very softly. That's handy in being in the bottom bunk then for storytelling, otherwise you'd need a very high chair. The Big Friendly Giant makes his magic powders out of the dreams that children dream when they are asleep, he said. Okay, so not horses. How? I asked. Tell me how, Dad. Dreams, my love. I even calls him my love. That's quite at odds with the stereotype of like a slightly reserved father not wanting to express his love. So this is clearly a very openly loving father. I think that's several mentions of love in the first few pages. Dreams, my love, are very mysterious things. They float around in the night air like little clouds searching for sleeping people. Can you see them? I asked. Nobody can see them. Then how does the Big Friendly Giant catch them? Ah, my father said, that is the interesting part. A dream, you see, as it goes drifting through the night air, makes a tiny little buzzing, humming sound. A sound so soft and low it is impossible for ordinary people to hear it. But the BFG, then it's true that people can only hear at certain frequencies. And that it's conceivable that giants or other beings could hear at other frequencies. This is actually quite scientifically plausible. But the BFG can hear, well, except the fact that it's talking about dreams. But the BFG can hear it easily. His sense of hearing is absolutely fantastic. Well, he may just hear it at lower frequencies. He may not be able to hear it where humans can hear. But it says he's going to hear it. I loved the far intent look on my father's face when he was telling a story. His face was pale and still and distant, unconscious of everything around him. The BFG, he said, can hear the tread of a ladybird's footsteps as she walks across a leaf. Well, that presumably doesn't have a very low frequency. So he just has a bigger range, I guess. He can hear the whisperings of ants. They would probably be quite high, generally. I think smaller animals have higher voices. I think so. Certainly whales, quite deep, right? They're big. Anyway. As they scurry around in the soil, talking to one another, he can hear the sudden shrill cry of pain a tree gives out when a woodman cuts into it with an axe. Well, this is getting quite fantastical now. Ah, yes, my darling, there is a whole world... Darling? Very affectionate father. Ah, yes, my darling, there is a whole world of sound around us that we cannot hear, because our ears are simply not sensitive enough. Well, that is true. What happens when he catches the dreams? I asked. He imprisons them in glass bottles and screws the tops down tight, my father said. He has thousands of these bottles in his cave. Does he catch bad dreams as well as good ones? Yes, my father said, he catches both, but he only uses the good ones in his powders. What does he do with the bad ones? He explodes them. That's cool. It is impossible to tell you how much I loved my father. When he was sitting close to me on my bunk, I would reach out and slide my hand into his, and then he would fold his long fingers around my fist, holding it tight. What does the BFG do with his powders after he has made them? I asked. In the dead of night, my father said, he goes prowling through the villages, searching for houses where children are asleep. Well, that sounds quite sinister, using the word prowling. Because of his great height, he can reach windows that are 1 and even 2 flights up, and when he finds a room with a sleeping child, he opens his suitcase. His suitcase? I said. The BFG always carries a suitcase and a blowpipe, my father said. The blowpipe is as long as a lamppost. The suitcase is for the powders. So he opens the suitcase and selects exactly the right powder, and he puts it into the blowpipe, and he slides the blowpipe in through the open window, and poof, he blows in the powder, and the powder floats around the room, and the child breathes it in. And then what? I asked. And then, Danny, the child begins to dream a marvellous and fantastic dream. And when the dream reaches its most marvellous and fantastic moment, then the magic powder really takes over. And suddenly the dream is not a dream any longer, but a real happening. And the child is not asleep in bed. He is fully awake and is actually in the place of the dream, and is taking part in the whole thing. I mean, really taking part in real life. More about that tomorrow. It's getting late. Good night, Danny. Go to sleep. In that bit he did say Danny, so that confirms that we are talking to Danny. It was conceivable this wouldn't have been Danny, but if it hadn't been, it would have been nice of the author to tell us. But it was anyway. Go to sleep. My father kissed me, and then he turned down the wick of the little paraffin lamp until the flame went out. I don't quite know how you turn down the wick. I guess you physically bend it over so the flame... I don't know. Never used a paraffin lamp, I think. But it's presumably not just a... I don't know. Could be some sort of dial. He seated himself in front of the wood stove, which now made a lovely red glow in the dark room. Dad, I whispered. What is it? Have you ever actually seen the big friendly giant? Once, my father said. Only once. You did? Where? I was out behind the caravan, my father said, and it was a clear moonlit night. And I happened to look up, and suddenly I saw this tremendous tall person running along the crest of the hill. He had a queer, long-striding, lolloping gait, and his black cloak was streaming out behind him like the wings of a bird. There was a big suitcase in one hand and a blowpipe in the other. And when he came to the high hawthorn hedge, nice alliteration, he just strode over it as though it wasn't there. Not the past tense of stride being strode. That's good. Were you frightened, Dad? No, my father said. It was thrilling to see him, and a little eerie, but I wasn't frightened. Go to sleep now. Good night. Second time I said that. Well, I think I shall stop there. The next chapter would be called Cars and Kites and Fire Balloons. And it starts, my father was a fine mechanic. So we're still dealing with Danny and his father. That was pretty good. Real page turner, actually. I might carry on reading it at some point. I think in some, obviously, as I said, the language slightly old-fashioned. The word gypsy is you probably wouldn't put it in a book nowadays. But other than that, I mean, it was quite nice. I actually wrote a book, and I had a kid whose mum isn't there, so it's the child being brought up by his father. So that reminded me of that a bit, which is nice. And I hadn't read this before, so I wasn't ripping it off, I promise. Maybe it's just a trope. They say maybe it's just in the air, this idea, so that both Dahl and I have picked it up. But yeah, pretty good. The illustrations are, I mean, in this edition they're kind of black and white, but they were nice, like the oily child. It's one of the cash register, the wagon. Yeah, you get a nice idea of Danny and his father. Seem to have a very strong relationship. I don't know if the relationship with the father will be, well, I would imagine it will play an important role throughout the book. But I don't know. I mean, we shall find out. And I quite like the crossover with the BFG. I don't remember the BFG very well, but I think he did something with dreams. So it would be nice if it was 100% consistent, but it may not be. And I wouldn't really mind too much. As I say, I'm not sure if Roald Dahl has like a single canon that all his books have to adhere to. And I wouldn't really mind either way, to be honest. But no, it was nice. In terms of where they live, they seem to be in England. They said something about the caravan going around England a lot. So that seems to be where they are. But yeah, I quite liked it. I would recommend that to a friend. That's it, really. Hope you enjoyed it. And do tune in next time for another of Mr. Bench's book reviews. See ya.